Baird is a political scientist at the University of Alberta. He specializes in media coverage of issues. He sees Bedlam members' perspective as naive.
Oh, gosh, yes. There is a kind of anarchist view out there that the individual being free to do as he or she likes can bring about peace and goodness. But that's a silly view that people drop eventually. To tell you the truth, I cannot think of a point of view on almost anything that doesn't get to the public. In fact, we may be the other way. We may be getting too much of too many points of view.
There are other people who've used excessive amounts of marijuana, and certainly their motivation may decline. If you're stoned the whole time, it's hard to get determined to be chairman of the board. But there is no convincing evidence that chronic marijuana use produces the kind of schizophrenia which was described by the caller in the majority of users. Okay? Sorry, I'm covering myself because you can't prove a negative. But I think that it's very important. I tend to feel probably that this individual had very many problems, of which marijuana was one.
Well, let's return to our phone calls now as we move from Calgary over to Edmonton on line 2. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I find it interesting that you mentioned that Jim Fulton's bill was there to encourage debate, yet you have two experts, neither of which are really debating on the side of legalization of marijuana. One of your experts says that the two main dangers of marijuana is lung damage and driving while stoned. I thought about this for a second, and I said, yeah, I agree with driving while stoned is a danger, and I do believe that education could probably handle that one. I imagine it's probably just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, to drive while watching television, but that's not against the law, I don't believe. As to causing lung damage, I believe that the latest medical research on that draws a line between cannabis tars and tobacco tars, whereas tobacco tars are radioactive, have radioactive isotopes in them and cause cancer. Cannabis tars do not. It's in the way that they're grown, in the way that they're harvested. And not only does cannabis not cause cancer, the damage to the lungs has been shown to be short-term, not long-term, because the damage is in the large air passageways, which have a tendency to heal themselves instead of the smaller passageways like tobacco. So there are your two reasons why, for example, trafficking, like Kim Campbell, let's say Kim Campbell passed the joint back to the person who passed it to her. That, like you said, is considered trafficking. And that, I think the maximum sentence for that is life in prison. Now, that to me is a little excessive. I think it would be much better off for everybody if we allowed the police to do their job in stopping all the murderers and white-collar criminals and all that sort of thing, and left people alone to decide what they put in their bodies.
Right, now you were mentioning just a moment ago that it's not illegal to watch TV while you're driving, while it is to smoke marijuana. But Rick Stewart, there are laws that would prevent you from watching, at least attempt to prevent you from watching TV while you were driving.
Under the Highway Traffic Act, I believe there's a section, it won't get you a criminal record, but could get you a fine.
A fine. Okay,
yeah.
Well, let's just say that perhaps it makes more sense to bring marijuana smoking. I mean, the real question here is whether the problems that come with marijuana smoking, and I'm not saying that it's problem-free. Obviously, the intake of any drug, there will be some problems. But whether these problems can be solved through education or through judges, bailiffs, police officers, jails. The other question,
just before you go any further, you would like it decriminalized. Would you like to make it legalized?
I mean, of course, there's no reason why any drug should be illegal to take. What you do when you make it, these people who might need help, who might not need help. I mean, one of your experts defined taking drugs as an adverse effect. Well, I don't. That's a matter of personal opinion. If these people need help, if they do in fact need help, you're just making them criminals and making it that much harder for them to get help. Now, I think the very most important fact of this whole debate is that neither of your experts have mentioned the real reason why marijuana is illegal in the first place. It has nothing to do with any sort of inherent dangers in the drug. The real reason is that the plant is so darn useful for thousands of years for making clothes, for making paper, for making rope, and we were about to find a way to run our cars on it when large corporations who knew this saw it to their advantage to facilitate making it illegal so that they could make profits off monopolizing selling other things, inferior substitutes that they can monopolize on.
Mind if I ask you a question, just moving back a little bit to what you were saying earlier?
Sure.
And I'm going to ask you the question knowing full well that there's an officer of the law in the studio here listening to you. Do you smoke it?
Yeah, I smoke it all the time.
How come?
Well, I mean, your psychologist, pharmacist, your scientific expert said that there's really no good reason for smoking it. I don't know. I find that human beings have a tendency to kick back and relax once in a while. I find that when I smoke a joint, first of all, it's not like alcohol where I'd get a hangover or could kill myself, toxify myself. I could smoke bales of the stuff, and the worst that could happen to me is that I fall asleep.
What do you get out of it?
What do I get out of it? Well, it tends to affect my perception of time, which means that sensations are stretched out. Food, I can savor the taste of food, and in sex, you savor that sensation as well.
Sex feels better, does it?
Yeah, it feels a lot better. I mean, as long as, like I said, problems do arise from it. You tend to get dry mouth, and you'd have to, make sure everything is well lubricated. But other than that, it tends to help sex rather than hinder it. On top of that, it tends to make me think long-term perspective instead of short-term survival. I tend to, get my life in order. It's been known to be associated with many, many religions, the Hindus, Buddhists, Confucianism.
But you don't smoke it for religious reasons. It just makes you feel
I'm
good.
an atheist, so I can't really, on the one hand, I can't say that. On the other hand, my belief system has been very affected by the use of marijuana. I tend to see things in a new light. I think that's why they call it a trip, is because...
In a rational light, though?
Well, I don't see any reason why there's anything irrational about chemically altering your brain to perceive things in a new way. I mean, it's a tool. As far as I'm concerned, with a tool like a hammer, you can bash people's brains in with it, or you can use it to build houses. And why make hammers illegal just because you can bash people's brains with it?
Yes. Caller who has a blatant disregard for the law, willing to flout it on the air. You've got the Prime Minister, you've got Bill Clinton. I'm just wondering if there is so much social acceptance of the law at the moment that philosophically it makes the law invalid, useless, and it should be discarded on those grounds.
We're still obliged, by the Narcotic Control Act, which is a misnomer for cannabis anyway, to enforce the law as it is. If the philosophy of the people and the lawmakers are such that we are going to make changes to decriminalize or legalize it, then we are obligated as police agencies to oblige by that decision.
Fight Back, a special report from Oldies 1260 CFRN continues.
I'm Jerry Bellica in our studios along with Lawrence Derry from ADAC, a professional counselor, Vicki, who's been telling us her story, Brian Feist, a paramedic from the Edmonton Ambulance Service, is going to be with us in a little while to tell us some of the things that he's seen. If you still are not convinced that some people have a problem, he will certainly enlighten you to that. We are going to take one more phone call, and then we're going to talk to some people from Paid here who've got some rather moving stories to tell us as well. Line 1 has been waiting for quite some time. Line 1, thanks for waiting. Go ahead. Hi, go ahead. You're on the air.
Hi. This guy's talking about marijuana being physically and mentally addicting.
You know, it's funny. We were just discussing this during the break, and Brian, I know we were going to get to you in a few minutes here, but I'd like Brian Feist, the paramedic, to come in here because we were just discussing this during the break, how a lot of people are not convinced that marijuana or any kind of smoke have any sort of impact on the body. Brian, what do you got to say to that?
Well, like the other panelist here was saying, that if anybody just had to see one autopsy, that's all he would have to see. An autopsy of a healthy lung, as opposed to an autopsy of even a smoking or a general everyday pack-a-day smoker, you'll see a major amount of difference.
Yes, you see a major amount of difference in people who live in the city versus people who live in the country.
Exactly, and that's all the pollutants that are in the air all the time anyway. So why compound that now with cigarette smoke, with your cannabis smoke, with your marijuana and such like that? It does physically impair.
Cannabis smoke and cigarette smoke, because cannabis, if it were legalized, you could take the THC and you could inhale that when it's heated, and you'd be doing almost no damage to your lungs at all.
Why is it every doper I've talked to in the last 6 months comes up with this crap? I mean, I'm sorry, I gotta get off the fence here.
It paralyzes your ciliary escalator in your lungs. What means that those tars and carcinogens stay down there longer?
Yeah, but what is it with every doper I've talked to in the last 6 months spends more time researching the effects that it may or may not have on your body than just...
because you guys are trying to throw us in jail every second.
Nobody's trying to throw you in jail. We're trying to make you think.
I do drugs all the time. Pot. You know, I smoke it every single day of my life, just about, and it doesn't cause any problems in my life, and it doesn't cause any problems in anybody else's life.
Well, then you're dreaming. Thanks very much. We appreciate that. If you don't think that abuse of any substance doesn't cause a problem in your life or somebody else's life, especially when you're talking about cannabis or alcohol, give your head a shake. Are you listening? Are you out there? We've been talking for the last 3 hours of some stories of people who've got incredible things to say about the impacts it's had on the lives of people they didn't even know until they finally woke up. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I'm rude. I just got no time for the garbage about, man, it doesn't do anything to me, man. I mean, give your head a shake. Wake up. Come on.
But the reasons the pro-marijuana lobby want marijuana legal has little to do with getting high, and a great deal to do with fighting oil giants like Saddam Hussein, Exxon, and Iran. The pro-marijuana groups claim that hemp is such a versatile raw material that its products not only compete with petroleum, but with coal, natural gas, nuclear energy, pharmaceutical, timber, and textile companies. It is estimated that methane and methanol production alone from hemp grown as biomass could replace 90% of the world's energy needs. If they are right, this is not good news for oil interests and could account for the continuation of marijuana prohibition.